Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller and I'll be your instructor in this demonstration, and what we are going to be diving into is going through and manipulating an assembly just a little bit more. We're going to use markup mode to do so, as well as some other capabilities, just kind of explore some additional details with assemblies as we try and wrap up this topic. So assemblies, we have duplicated an assembly, and I have one of the duplicated components up here. And now that we have it duplicated, I can see that if I select this component, I own that object as the current user I am. This will update and show me that updated information. And then I can now go up to the top and I can add a component to it. Now, if I don't have this button, I don't have permissions. I'm going to go ahead and add a child here, and what that means is it's just going to be a component directly under the selected line. I can see it came up over on the right hand side, so I'm going to undock that real quick and just kind of drag it off into the middle. And then I can choose to search for a component, create a new component, and then go through its release cycle or access something from my palette. So in this case, I'm just going to add a new bearing and hit number of elements is going to be 2, and then quantity per occurrence, which is the first line, occurrences, is going to be 2. So this should give me 2 lines in the underneath the selected component, as well as 2 quantity for each line. If I choose add, then you'll see that both of those show up, and I see 2 is listed for each one. If I wanted to remove one of those, I could come up to the top, or I could try and right click. You can see remove is right here. I could also select parent, so there are some options in here for you. I could hit remove here, or I could go up to the top and say edit structure and then choose remove. So it's really up to you on which way you do that. But when I choose remove, it'll ask me to do that, and I'll hit remove. So in that case, I don't have what's called markup mode turned on because it just committed the change that I wanted to do. So if I turn on this markup mode, which you can see right here across the top of the screen, select it, now that's active. And when it refreshes the screen, I'm going to come down and I'm going to select the one that I had, and I'm going to go ahead and replace that with another object. So in this case, I'm going to choose Edit, Replace, and then I'm going to create or access an additional object. So maybe I needed the support bearing and not the bearing mount. Hit Replace. And now at this point, it'll reload the assembly, and you'll see that it hasn't saved anything. So it's not prompting me to save at this point. I can just see what changes I have made. Now I can come up here and I can say maybe I want to remove this component, right click and remove, and you'll see that it's going to ask me to remove it, and then it'll redline it. So it hasn't committed that change just yet, it's just confirming that I wanted to do it. Then I can put it into edit mode and just click the edit button in the top right corner, move this over a little bit, and maybe I want to change the quantity for my stage channel to 2. So if I tab through that and select off, I'll save my edits to the assembly, and you'll see that that's now marked up as well. So anything new will be green, anything removed will be red, anything replaced will have a line through it, and then green next to it. And this is how you can kind of mark up your assembly through this method, which is not CAD driven, it's through this interface, and then commit those changes to the assembly once you are completely done. So at this point, you can see turn on to use markup mode to propose changes, which I have done. And then to execute on those changes, you can see there's a markup over on the right hand side. And if I select the top level of the assembly, I can see all of the markups that have been applied to this assembly. I can select a markup here, and then notice that I have the ability to cut or copy that markup if I wanted to. If I go to the ... notice I have export to Excel for the table, and I can really just kind of review those markups. If I come up to the top and I go into Edit or Manage, you'll notice there really isn't a way to commit those. What you're going to end up needing to do is, with that markup mode turned on, notice I just clicked it again and turned it off. It's refreshing the screen and I don't see those. Select it again and the markup mode turns back on, and all of those changes should still be in here, so you can see the red lines. So it's just storing the markups so that people can review those markups and provide the change on the next step of the workflow process. Now, you do need to be able to execute on the markups, and you need to have the permissions to do so as you go through it. But in here, this is just a really neat way to store the markups off. And then if you have permissions to edit the assembly, go in and actually configure or execute on those markups. So in this case, I have turned on markup mode. I haven't submitted it to the workflow. I don't have the ability to do it, so I'll have to have somebody else execute on these. But other things that I can do here is this round trip to Excel. I can export the Excel structure from what I have. I can allow the structure to change in Excel. Or I can say include an ID as a hyperlink. So I could change like the hierarchy of the structure, what child objects and parent objects there are versus just attributes with the first one. Second one gives me a link to those objects. And then I can choose a template from the list if it has one available. So any properties that you may want to add. And then in here, if you try and hit export at the moment, it will not allow you to do so because you haven't picked a template. So in this case, the export from Excel, I would need to make sure that I have a template defined in here. And notice I do not. So if I uncheck this and I pull it down now, notice I don't have it there. So when working with Office integration, export to round trip, you need to make sure that you have additional components and your administrators will set those up. Now, please stay tuned for our Office integration overview. We'll take a deep dive into Office, Excel round trip, and a lot of those other components to allow us to interact with those Office components outside of the system. So in here, we have talked about editing the structure. We had the top level selected. We came in and we replaced some components. Notice there are other options in here that you can fiddle with. And then in here, I could add additional children or alternates and substitutes, which allow me to replace what part I'm using in the case that maybe I can't access the supplier or something along those lines. So in here, I'm going to move this over and you'll see that in the assembly, I have any changes that are going to be applied as well. In here, if I select it, and you'll notice markups for this element are here. If I select that, you can see I could cancel the markup by selecting the top level line here. Over on the right hand side, no new markups are here. But if I open the markup, notice it tells me exactly what has occurred with this. It's a remove a line markup, and then you'll have to go forward with actually going in and marking that up. Now, before I want to apply these markups and changes to it, I may want to compare this assembly to another assembly. So up in the top, you have what's called split context. And if I come up here and select this, then pull this down, notice that split context is basically going to open up the split view for the assembly. If I shift select another assembly in here, you can try and activate some of the other components and see their common properties. So between the two selected components, what are the differences? I can also do 3D, where I can see the two selected components will be in the 3D tab in that case. In order to launch it in the dual windows, you'll have to do what's called a compare. So in this case, my 3D came up and I can see information about what's highlighted versus the other, but my split content isn't available yet. So compare is actually in here. You can say view, compare structures, Or you can select it right at the top here, compare structures. If I select that, it'll open up a left and a right hand pane, and I can see the two structures as I have them selected. Stage channels on the right, and then the cutting heads on the left. It'll also have a comparison panel that opens up and shows me anything that's specific to one side or the other, which you can see down below. You can also generate a report on this comparison and see other information about it. Now, if I wanted to open up a different assembly over on this side, I could come in here and I could say exit compare, and I could do a compare against something else. If you right click on it, notice there's no way to replace the assembly that you have. And if you edit it, it's not going to give me permissions because I don't have access to that. So I'm going to go ahead and exit my compare. I've got this assembly open here. I'm going to select the top, and then in the compare, notice compare structures is gone. And that's mainly because comparing two structures requires you to select two structures in the system. So one place that I know that we've created multiple assemblies, some different than others, is inside of our new stuff folder. So I've got the cutting head assembly, and then I've got the updated cutting head assembly from the different methods I use to create them. If I take both of them, right click, notice I don't get the compare assemblies, but I do get the property comparison. And then if I come into view, I can see the compare structures from this view as well. So if you're in the structure window, you're not going to easily be able to compare two top level assemblies because it's hard to select them. But if you can find those two assemblies in another location, come into the view and hit compare structures, now we can open up both assemblies in the window side by side, and we can get a true comparison between those two assemblies. In here, it has fully loaded the two, and you can see that this hex socket is different than the linear bearing as well as the hex socket head. So there are a couple of little differences in here, and if I select them in the pane on the right, it will actually highlight those differences for me, and you can see those are changing. I can do all levels or the current level, so I could do components only or all levels to see what has changed between the two systems. And then in the options panel, I can come down and I can say what's different, if they have matches, if they're unique on the left or right, and then have different colors assigned to those. So you can see those colors there, and then I can see the results from each one of the assemblies. I can even generate a report at the bottom and click compare. When it runs the report, you can see it, you can view it in the attachments tab underneath the cutting head alternate. So if I select the cutting head alternate and go down to the attachments tab, at that point I should be able to see the compare report, and I'll be able to open that up and see the differences just like I can see them in the view. So with this split screen, it gives you a lot of power to compare the two elements, and you essentially get all the same components as you would with the single one. You've just kind of got two different displays up. Now you can open both assemblies in their own tabs, but then you don't get that comparison tool that shows you what's different in it. But you could have the two tabs kind of side by side if you wanted to. Sky's the limit. Now one thing here is I do know that the assembly on the left hand side had a revised. So notice it's showing B, whereas on the right hand side it's showing A. So in here, the revision rule that I have applied at the moment is latest working, which is basically going to look for anything that does not have a release status on it, which is the B revision, and by date, so the latest one. If it doesn't have a release, or if it doesn't have a working state, then it will show me the released one. If I come in and I say something like any status no working, then it will only show me revisions that have a status, and it will show me question marks for anything that doesn't. So if I switch to that, you'll notice it updates it only on the left hand side, not on the right hand side. And then you'll notice that a lot of these now have question marks for what revision they're going to pull, because my revision rule does not match anything on that revision. So this is a good validation technique to see if everything's been released yet. You can also make sure that you're working with the latest data in the assembly, and anytime you switch between those, you get a different use case. So each company has their own set of revision rules for the most part. Latest working, again, we'll find the latest working one and then fall back on any released revisions for that component. And then there's a lot of other examples in here that have a very specific order, and you can always hover over the information button on them to get more information about what you might need to do to view the revision information. So I'm going to click that, and you can see that this rule, the precise rule, has no arguments to edit. I can select this and add a clause. I can come in here and add it a group or configure it. But basically, I want to change what I have here. So if I come back in, pull this down, and look at latest working and hit the info button, then I can see this one will work with working, precise, or has status. So this is actually going to show me it's looking for any status after it finds any working ones, and then precise would be what I set up for. So any of these essentially in this order, it's going to look for and configure. If I've manually set up an occurrence, precise will work. If it's pulling on nothing matches that, then it'll fall back on the latest working one, and if nothing matches that, then it'll show the latest released one. So inside of 2412, you have the ability to look up what these revision rules do by hovering over and clicking the I button next to the revision rule. So we hope that this gives you a good overview. I'm going to exit my split of working in assemblies in Active Workspace. Obviously, there is more to it than that, but that'll get you up and running to get you into your individual use cases. In the next video, we are diving into 3D components, and we're going to just simply work a little bit with this 3D viewer, which you see loading up on my right-hand side, where we can interact with components, turn on or off, perform measurements, and do those types of tasks. So we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video, and stay tuned for more.